So we just finished the crazy era that was the Baroque era. It was super just over the top. Everything was thrown into the piece that they could possibly cram in there. Super fancy, super rule bound, but excessive. Wild. Then what happens is we get to a certain point, and it's kind of like when you go and you have all of your Halloween candy in one sitting, and then after that, you're like, I'm never going to eat another piece of candy ever again. That was the classical era. So the classical era comes right after the Baroque era and is like, whoa, we need to calm the heck down. We went way overboard. We're losing so much of the nuance of music in just trying to make it super fancy. We need to dial it back. We need to pull it in. We need to restrain ourselves and create what is elegant and refined and beautiful. Now for me, and this is not how historians would describe the classical era. This is my personal opinion. But for me, the classical era basically takes the Baroque era and is like, let's make it boring. Which isn't necessarily true. There's some really, really cool stuff that happens in the classical era, but they just pull back so much. So there goes the complexity. Now it's all about simplicity. You're gonna notice from this point on, there's this constant back and forth. One era will say one thing, and then the era after it will be like, you're wrong. We need to do the complete opposite of that. And then the next era will be like, what are you talking about? That was fine, but we're gonna just do it a little bit differently. And then the next era comes in and they're like, no, this is terrible. We can't do this ever again. And then the next era comes in and is like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just a flip-flop of doing the opposite of what they were just doing all the time. So this time, the flip-flop is, okay, you're being way too extravagant. We need to dial it in. Later on, we see that flip-flop in a different way. So the classical era, we see huge development of what we know as the symphony orchestra today. Like, that is one of the primary ensembles. We're starting to see instruments that we are familiar with now, like the violin, viola, cello, bass, the predecessor to the clarinet. The flute is still very much happening. The piano starts to become more dominant. Here's the thing about the piano. So it replaced the harpsichord, and I might have talked about harpsichord in my last video, but harpsichord is literally the worst instrument of all time. That is another opinion, not a fact. But one of the many issues that the harpsichord had was that it could not play dynamics. When you press the key, it plucks a string, and that's what you get. There's no soft plucking, there's no loud plucking, it's just a pluck, the same pluck every single time. With the piano, now we have hammers that are tuned to the force that you hit the key with so that you could play at multiple dynamics. And so people started like running to this instrument because it was so much more expressive, had so much more capability to be musical. And so we see in the classical era, the harpsichord kind of starts to fade, and the piano really takes over from a standpoint of convenience and a standpoint of ability. Along with the development of symphony orchestras and all the instruments that are involved with them, we start to see concertos popping up. These are pieces of music that feature a particular soloist and really highlight a soloist with accompaniment from the rest of the orchestra. So music starts getting written for the purpose of letting these famous musicians in front of an audience. And that concerto style of writing really starts to shape the texture of the music that we hear. We're no longer hearing multiple voices at the same time and overlapping with each other. Now it's really just we have this one clear melody and accompaniment. So we hear this beautiful melody that everyone can sing along to, and then the rest of the orchestra is just helping that melody shine. It's also important to know that the church is no longer like even considered part of the primary music supporting entity. Now rich nobles are hiring composers privately to compose for them, or paying composers to write pieces of music. And so the main source of music has shifted from the church and using it for the purpose of worship to, okay, now music has been monetized and the rich and the nobles are using their privilege to create new music and pay for new music. So composers during this era were often hired by a specific noble and were their personal composer. This era features a whirlwind of composers. So many really, really famous and influential composers come out of this era, like Haydn. And Mozart. And Beethoven. Now, Haydn and Mozart were kind of in the same vein. They wrote music that was very classical, very refined, very elegant, very reserved. And because of that, many of their pieces of music became pieces that would stand the test of time, pieces that we still recognize the melodies of to this day. However, when it comes to Beethoven, he was more toward the end of the era, and Beethoven was very evidently fed up with the refined crap. If I were to describe Beethoven in one word, it would definitely be the word angsty. Basically, everyone before Beethoven was working to create this beautiful, singable, memorable art. And Beethoven was just like, dude, I have emotions. I have emotions, and those are going to be in the music, and I don't care what you say about it. They're going to be in there. And boy, were they in there. And that's where we kind of start to see that flop into the next era is there's this refined art that people are making, and then Beethoven's like, nah, bruh, emotion's where it's at, and I have a lot of it, so I'm just gonna vomit it all over you, and you're gonna love it. I'll talk more about Beethoven in the next era, because he was kind of the bridge into the next era, and so you'll get more information on him then. This era also focuses really intensely on instrumental music. Vocal music was still being written, but it's nothing compared to what it used to be. Where vocal was the primary music form. There was always a vocalist within the ensemble back in the Baroque era, in the medieval era. But now the classical era comes about, and it's like, okay, all these new instruments are being created. We're really defining this symphonic orchestra form. Let's really highlight the instrumentalists during this era. It's not about the singers as much. Okay, this video is already too long. There's so much more. Go read about it or just go listen to the music. You learn the most about an era by listening to its music. And we'll talk about the Romantic era next time, which I'm super stoked about because the Romantic era is awesome. I'll see you guys later.